Hey everyone, thanks for checking out this latest 2017 retrospective. Today I am covering the Xbox physical exclusives, and for reasons we'll get into, I'm also going to cover all the digital exclusives in this episode. So digital games are something I don't really cover for a while. It's usually the last thing I do for a console, and especially with recent ones, it's hard to keep up with them. So the other systems, I might not get that done for a while, but for Xbox, you're getting it early. If you haven't seen any of my retrospectives before, I started doing this as a way to catalog my collection and decide what I don't really need anymore and what I want to pick up. I really appreciate the response I've been getting for these. I have quite a few more planned this year, so if you dig this stuff, please subscribe and share it with your friends. I really appreciate that. Getting back to the retrospective, what I like to do is go through things in order of release, pick out all the titles that are worth knowing about, do all the exclusives first and do a multi-platform episode later, and just go through and see what was great in the library. This year has been a pretty sad year for Xbox. It's actually a shame because for the first time, I really dig what Microsoft is doing. I'm typically a big PlayStation fan, but some of their business practices this year have really, rubbed me the wrong way, while Microsoft really seems to be changing for the better. So I don't like where this year ended up for Microsoft. I hope they turn it around, but hopefully they will. It doesn't sound like they've got that much more planned for this year, so that's kind of a shame, but, we can always hope. Let's get right into it with the first big exclusive of the year, Halo Wars 2, the sequel to Halo Wars that no one was really asking for. Like the original Halo Wars, it's an RTS, and this one takes place after the original Halo Wars and Halo 5. The game introduces the new Banished Covenant faction, who are trying to invade the Forerunner installation that made the Halo rings where the humans are stationed. The game includes 12 missions where you play as the humans against the Banished. Like the first game, the controls have been designed to work well with a controller, but you can also use a keyboard and mouse. Gameplay is similar to the previous game, with a focus on building up your base and sending out infantry, ground, and air vehicles to fight the opposing faction. A DLC expansion was released later in this year called Awakening the Nightmare. Right after that, we get Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Now, the only reason I'm mentioning it here is because even though the PlayStation 4 version came out in 2016, this version only came out in March of this year, and Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is a great game, so definitely worth checking out and worth mentioning that it came out. Next up is an update of a game that came out a couple years ago. This is the definitive edition of ReCore. The original ReCore was an interesting action-adventure game in 2016 that released to really mixed reviews. The game was created by ex-Capcom Mega Man producer Kenji Ifune and several members who had worked on the Metroid Prime series. The game started off good but quickly showed that it was an unfinished and unpolished mess. There was an extra slot for a robot that you couldn't get in the game, and there were large portions of the map that really felt barren. This year the game got a free DLC patch that features some major updates and was sold again physically as a definitive edition. This patch fixes many of the technical issues from the original and adds the new robot, 2 new areas, and 10 new dungeons. Overall, the game still has some design issues, but this is the experience I think they originally meant to release, so it's definitely worth checking out if you didn't get to play the original. Following that, we get probably the biggest release of the year, but not one I cared about. That's Forza Motorsport 7. Now, I've never been a big racing fan, and all the controversy around the loot box surrounding this game really turned me off of it. So perhaps the biggest showpiece for the 4K graphics on the new Xbox X console, but really marred by a bunch of loot box stuff that tried to get you to buy loot boxes, otherwise you had to grind for cars that were pretty easy to get in the previous games. This game is the biggest Forza to date with over 700 cars and 32 tracks. Much of the content from the previous games was brought over, including stuff from the Horizon series, but I'm not sure how much of it is actually new. The dynamic weather feature from Horizon 3 was also introduced in this one, and you can now customize your driver. So just another good game for Forza fans, a great showpiece if you're into 4K gaming, but again, it's kind of a big step back for people who are really into Forza 5 and 6 to see them just step back the series a little further to try and sell loot boxes. Following that, a really interesting one, we get Disneyland Adventures Remastered. Now this is really interesting because it's coming out around the same time that the Kinect is being discontinued. So the original game was a 360 game that used Kinect and let you explore the Disneyland park, but this time they've updated it for 4K. So from all the Kinect games, it's surprising they decided to bring this one over, because even though it's a cool look at the Disneyland park, it's also a pretty old version of the park. Long before the newer Star Wars and Marvel stuff was in place, none of that stuff has been updated and added to the game, so there's nothing really new and interesting here. Really, it's only interesting for people who are really interested in Disneyland, maybe can't go. This is a decent way to experience how that park was years ago, so more of a curiosity than actually a good game. Next up is Super Lucky's Tale, which is a generic platformer that I wouldn't bother mentioning at all if it wasn't for just how few games I have to talk about this year. This game is a sequel to the original Lucky's Tale, which was an Oculus Rift launch title. The game is an old school 3D platformer, but there's not really much to say about it. It's mediocre, and from what I hear, it's got bad controls and a frustrating camera, which are two things you really don't want in a platformer. So not a great game, but surprisingly an Xbox exclusive, and worth noting that it's the sequel to a VR game, so I'm not sure what they were thinking with this one, but there it is. Which brings us to the big thing on the table, the one thing I was actually really excited about this year, the one thing that there's not really a good reason to buy. I mean, I had a good reason, but I think few people fit in that category, which is I was just getting into 4K gaming. This is the thing that pushed me into both 4K gaming and 4K media. So I skipped out on the PS4 Pro. I didn't think it was enough of a step up. It didn't really play 4K games. It didn't have a 4K Blu-ray drive. I'm a big fan of physical media, obviously, so I really wanted that drive, and so when they announced this, I was all over it. Again, it's sad because they didn't give you very many games this year to play on it, but they did do a lot for it. So if you don't know, the Xbox One X, previously known as Scorpio, came out, and it is the most powerful gaming console around. That's what they say. Really, it's just a souped up Xbox One. It is really powerful, actually. Like, not as powerful as a super high-end PC, but you can't build a PC for the cost of this thing. So if you're into console gaming and don't have a great PC, this is a cool thing to have. A lot of games are updated for it. That makes it really special. There is a ton of games that now have 4K support, so a bunch of the older Xbox exclusives are worth checking out again. I personally picked up Horizon 3 just to play that on this, and they've also done a lot of cool things, like they keep pushing out backwards compatible Xbox 360 titles. Some of those have been updated, so you can play some 360 games in 4K, which is just crazy that they're taking backwards compatibility to that level. They also went ahead and put out 8 original Xbox games that you can play in 4K, so that's crazy that backwards compatibility has gotten to that stage on the Xbox when PlayStation has completely ignored it. It's really cool to be able to play games like Ninja Gaiden Black and Crimson Skies and Knights of the Old Republic in 4K on a console. I really hope they continue that and put out more original Xbox games. Not really any reason to go out and own it for the price point unless you were planning on buying a 4K Blu-ray player anyway, but I was, so I'm happy to have it. Everything looks great on it. I bought a new receiver and TV just to go along with it. The last kind of notable exclusive to come out last year is Hello Neighbor. Now, Hello Neighbor was the PC indie hit in which you try to break into your neighbor's home after seeing some pretty suspicious behavior and try and figure out what's going on in his basement. It's a stealth puzzle game in which you're expected to get caught by your neighbor over and over while trying to figure out what to do in each of the acts. There's no real punishment for getting caught, as the world doesn't really reset, but the neighbor does learn from your previous attempts and adapts to your playstyle. So while it's great to see this come to consoles, it does feature some pretty questionable design issues that I found with the game. Overall, it's a bit janky, but it's still cool to have this on consoles. I love when these indie games come out. So if it's something that you've heard about but maybe didn't really want to check out on PC, now you can get the console version. So because there were so few physical exclusives this year, I decided to go into the digital stuff for this episode. Now, there's not that much digital stuff either, but there's some pretty interesting titles, so let's get right into it. The first one is the Halo Wars Definitive Edition, which came out in April. Now, this was originally released as a pre-order bonus for the Ultimate Edition of Halo Wars 2. This is the remastered version of the Xbox 360 game, and it includes updated graphics and all the previous DLC. Following that, we get Narcosis, which is a pretty interesting deep-sea survival horror game. The game stars a diver who's stranded deep in the Pacific Ocean after an accident and must find his way to safety before his oxygen runs out. The game is notable because of the great environment it has for horror, and it's worth checking out for fans of horror games. Next up is Slime Rancher, which is a really interesting mix of an open-world first-person shooter and a farming sim. The game stars a character who starts a new slime ranch on a faraway planet. Gameplay involves using your vacuum pack to wrangle different types of slimes and collect food items to feed them, then harvest the slime byproducts to sell. You can upgrade your equipment in Rancher to make things easier. In September, we get Cuphead, the indie game of the year. This game mixes amazing 1930s style animation with tough but fair run and gun or horizontal shoot 'em up segments. This game is basically a boss run mode with a couple small platform stages, and lets you play as Cuphead or co-op with Mugman, taking out huge bosses with different forms. There's an upgrade system to help you unlock some helpful abilities and weapons, and I just highly recommend you check it out. Don't be dissuaded by talk of how hard it is. It's pretty manageable with some effort. It's worth checking out. It's really fun. It's a beautiful looking game, and it's just something you really should experience if you're into gaming. Next up, one of the really big exclusives for the year, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds. This is the console exclusive version of the PC hit that just came out of early access. This itself is kind of early access. It's not quite as solid as the PC game. It's missing a lot of the features. It has some stuff like vaulting, but it doesn't have some of the extra maps and just some of the tweaking that has. It also doesn't run quite as well as you would expect, although I hear they keep patching it and it is getting better. Now, this is something they released at retail as well, but it just has a code inside the box. And that's just funny because, they released a retail box for a game that's technically in beta. If you don't know what Battlegrounds is, it is an FPS that's similar to Counter-Strike, but it takes inspiration from the Battle Royale movie in which kids are trapped on an island and have to kill each other. And the game is like that. You are one of 100 players who get sent to an island, you drop in randomly, and you have to survive. Basically, 100 people are trying to kill each other and you want to be the last one left alive. It is a ton of fun. It's a really interesting game. There's a lot of other games trying to rip it off right now to varying degrees of success, but still, this is kind of a new genre, something I think that will definitely be big in the coming years, and something you definitely want to check out right now if you can. So that's it for my Xbox 2017 retrospective. I'm going to do multi-platform next, so stay tuned for that. I've got a bunch of other retrospectives planned for this year, so please stay tuned for all of those. Again, I really appreciate your support. I'll see you next time.